Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Tank Talk podcast. So happy you are here. I'm here hanging out with John from KG Tropicals. Say hello, everybody.
Hello, everybody. Very excited to be here, as I am every week.
He does that so well. Well, today we are going to be talking about aquarium backgrounds. And I know you might be saying to yourself, really? An entire podcast dedicated to aquarium backgrounds? Yes, because it's one of the more interesting things you can do to your aquarium. And believe it or not, it can have a big impact on the way your fish look and the way they behave. And I know both of us have done quite a few backgrounds of different types, and there's a lot of different options out there. And so we're going to be talking about all of those today. So I'm going to start out with the easiest one, and then I'm going to give you an option. So easiest number one thing you can do is, of course, don't worry about it. Just let the tank, the glass be just glass, no background whatsoever. And a lot of people do that. And if you do it, it doesn't make you a less sophisticated fish keeper. It doesn't make you a bad fish keeper. In fact, you may be an amazing fish keeper with no background on your aquarium whatsoever. That being said, there are a few downsides to that. One, you're going to see cords and you're going to see equipment. So if you don't mind looking at that, hey, who cares? Just roll with it. Not a big deal. The other thing is you're kind of at the mercy of the color of your walls. And so whatever your wall color is, that's what you're going to see in the background. And so if you really love the wall color you have and you want to see that in your fish tank, awesome. You're all set up. Nothing more to worry about. But if you've got a wall color, like maybe you've got some crazy wallpaper in there, maybe it's full of SpongeBob wallpaper. You're like, wow, now I'm going to see that in the back of my aquarium. Well, that can be an issue. So you don't have to have a background. You can have a backgroundless aquarium, but you are going to see aquarium stuff, cords, equipment. You are going to see whatever the wall is behind you, if there is a wall behind you. And sometimes you might not want a background because you've got a tank like I've got right behind me. It's right in the center of the room. And it wouldn't make any sense to have a background on there anyway. Now, cheap ways. Have you ever done cheap backgrounds, John? Is there anything like money-saving ways to tackle this project?
Yeah, but before I get into that, I do have to mention you're one of those rare scenarios where I don't think you not having a background on those 125s would be a terrible thing, because that's a nice looking wall you got there. But for most people, and even mine with the wood might not be bad, but most people just looking at a white wall, that's just kind of, it's going to look lazy and it's not going to look very good. So, but I would say the cheapest that I've ever done, people may make fun of me for this, but hey, sometimes I had to do what I had to do. Wrapping paper. We've used Christmas style wrapping paper before. Don't get it wet, because then it's a big problem. But, you got some left over from Christmas, throw it on there with your little Santa Clauses and your candy canes. No, the one that we did was actually like a gold wrapping paper, and it worked, and it was fine. But that's probably the cheapest. You may say painting is the cheapest, but when you add it all up, I think a little teeny piece of wrapping paper is probably cheaper than that.
Oh, I would say so for sure. Yeah, the wrapping paper. I know Joanna, the small skate, my wife, she did an entire video on ways to do backgrounds very cheap. And one of the things that she would use, similar to your wrapping paper idea, was using just kind of like the crafting paper. And then she would tape it to the sides, or and you could have a million different colors, but just like you said, if this stuff gets wet, it will discolor, it might fall apart, but who cares? You spent just pennies. Hopefully it just took you minutes to kind of put all that together. And she actually came up with a way so you wouldn't see any of the creases or anything like that, or the seams of what she did. So it's kind of cool. But yeah, if you can just use paper. The stores sell the stuff too. That's essentially what it is. But that's a little bit more waterproof, is almost like the waterproof type of tank backgrounds. You just tape them in. For years and years and years, I used those.
Me too.
The nice thing about those is, like, you'd go to Petco or PetSmart and they'd be reversible. Remember, I don't know if they still sell them, but one side would be black and the other side would be like a really, really super dark blue. And I've used both of those. They look pretty good. They look pretty decent.
I even used the ones in the past that were like plants. It looks like a planted aquarium in the background. Yep. And then the other side would be black, but I would never use the black side. I'd always use the fancy side.
Well, yeah, I mean, well, I did too back in the 80s and stuff. You like that was the
Right.
thing to do. You'd have like the ocean scene, you had like some shark and a whale in there, and then like your little neons. Like, well, they just don't go together. But as a kid, who cares? It looked cool. That's all that mattered. The only downside to doing the aquarium just store bought Petco, PetSmart type backgrounds, and even the paper is if water does get between the tank and the background, you get those hard water stains. And so that can be a little bit annoying when after, and it doesn't usually happen right away, but usually after a couple of years, you're like, all right, I'm starting to get some water stains back there. And maybe the tape that you use is starting to kind of fall apart and it's starting to peel away. So you're constantly retaping one part of it, or you've got some equipment there that's pressing on it. So there can be downsides there. Before we go any further, though, I want to talk a little bit about the the reasons why we use backgrounds, right? Because you mentioned something that kind of made me think about it. Like, hey, you know what? You got that wall back there, or you got your wall. It actually looks pretty cool, right? So the one thing to consider when you are looking at an aquarium, and a lot of people put a lot of thought into their plants, their rocks, and their substrate, and they want that aquarium to look cool. And they want the fish to look awesome. And people ask all the time, hey, my fish don't look as nice as the pictures that I've seen. And I've always got two responses to that. One is maybe the pictures that you're looking at were taken by somebody who really loves the saturation button on Photoshop. And so these fish actually never look the way that they look in a picture because someone's just like, I'm going to make these things look crazy colors, right? So that could be one thing. But the second thing is fish will often color based on their surroundings. They'll color up based on their surroundings. So substrate and background are the two most important things you can do when you're looking to maximize fish color. I promise you, if you're watching this on YouTube and you're seeing the tank behind John, he's got those awesome peacock cichlids and he's got a nice dark background in there. And that's probably one of the best ways to show those male peacocks because they're going to get this nice deep the reds, the
Yep.
blues, the OBs with the oranges and stuff. That's when they're going to maximize their color. So there's a lot of fish out there that actually look better with a darker background and a darker substrate. Definitely not all, but many, especially your very common tropical fish, they're just going to feel more secure. And so if you want to maximize your fish color and comfort, try a darker background. You don't necessarily have to even change the substrate. If you've got something in there you like, just leave it. But that darker background will often show off colors a lot nicer than just a white wall in the back or a gray or something like that. Or even like the brick that I have back here. I like it for the wall. But if that was the background in my fish tanks, I promise you my geophagus would not color up the same. The nano fish that I have in there, especially my green cubitai, and I've got some dwarf rasboras in the nano tank, they would really start to kind of pale. They'd look a little bit pale and color down. So those darker backgrounds sometimes will give a fish a nice deep dark color. Doesn't always work. There are some fish like the rainbow fish, rainbow cichlids, not rainbow fish, but the rainbow cichlids. You put them on a dark background and they start to muddy up. All right. Some
Mm.
shell dwellers do the same thing. So is there any fish that you've noticed in particular besides your peacocks that look really nice on a dark or a light background?
Well, I have found personally that almost every fish that I've ever kept looks better with the dark background. But I have no better example of the opposite of a fish being impacted by their colors or by their surroundings and it changing the color of that fish than my Lepradi biker, Bashir, whatever you want to call it. It's weird because I have three bikers. I have an ornate, which was a gift from Eric Furlow. He's the biggest one. He's a monster. He's right in front of me. I have an Enlacari and I have the Lepradi. The other two are not affected at all, but I've had three different substrates in my 360 over the last 2 years. I've had bare bottom. I've had play sand, which is like white, like really, really sand color. And then I have the Carib Sea naturals in there now, which has a lot more color in it and stuff like that. That fish dramatically changes his colors dependent on the substrate. Background, no difference because it's always been black. But when I had it bare bottom, he was dark and vibrant and like so just looked like an alligator. It was unbelievable. When I put the sand in there, he basically turned the color of the sand. And I was worried about him. I thought he was sick because he looked so pale and he just did not look healthy. I went back to bare bottom and he went back to dark again. And then I put this Carib Sea in there now, and he's kind of midway in between. Like he's not super dark, but he's not super pale either. He's just kind of he looks really good, but he's not, it doesn't look the same. So it can definitely have an effect. I know we're talking about backgrounds here and I'm talking about substrate, but the point I'm making is the fish can, like chameleons, completely change their appearance based on the background. But fish that I know look best, I mean, you've already said it, it's the African cichlids. They absolutely pop with that darker background. A lot of people with African cichlids like to use rock backgrounds or the artificial backgrounds, the 3D backgrounds, which I'm sure we'll get into. And that can dramatically impact how good they look. They'll pale down a little bit. They won't have that contrast. They won't look as vibrant as they will just against that regular black background. So
Yep.
I don't know if that answers your question, but here we go.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would say the one fish that really was impacted by substrate color and especially background color for me are the Geophagus. And I don't know why I did this, but I know why I did it. In the 150, I had the Geophagus altifrons in it. One point, I had a blue background, and Joanna picked out, this is way before she was really into fish. She let me get the 150. She's like, but I want to pick out the substrate. It was blue gravel mixed with black gravel. And it was, if you watch the early videos, you look at that tank, you're like, ooh, okay. But the Geophagus showed insane color. Then we wanted to make it more natural. So we actually went darker on the background, but like a brown on the substrate, like a light tan. And the fish lightened up a little bit, but it didn't look nearly as nice. And so for those of you who love the Geophagus, and a lot of the South and Central American cichlids, double dark is what I call it. Dark substrate, dark background. You're going to get way better color on most of the fish. Not all of them, but most of them for sure. But I actually think the opposite is true for the Lake Tanganyikans. And one of them, I don't know if it's a mistake, but one of the things I probably should have thought through a little bit more is I've got a Lake Tanganyikan tank in the gallery right behind me. And I did go light substrate, which was good, but then I went black background because I was going to put a rock background in there, but I decided not to. A lot of Lake Tanganyikan fish, African cichlids, they actually look better in a lighter colored surrounding. And I kind of messed that one up a little bit halfway. So the substrate's compensating a little bit, but not as much as I would like. So keep that in mind as we're talking about backgrounds. It is going to have an impact absolutely on many types of fish and how they look in your aquarium. So we talked about no background, seeing stuff, and the wall is, you're basically at the mercy of whatever is behind your aquarium. We talked about really cheap ways to go at it, and that is with the paper or the store-bought background, so it's just a one-dimensional color, or maybe you've got the picture of SpongeBob or something like that. You mentioned painting. Have you painted any of your tanks before?
All of them.
Okay.
I've painted all of them. This tank here, which I'm sitting in front of my 240-gallon Peacock and Hap tank, that tank originally came blue. In fact, if you look up close, up in the top there, you can still see a little bit of it. I liked it. It was great. But after like 6 years, I was ready for a change. And I scraped off that blue and I painted it black. I am a fan of the black backgrounds. I just think it's kind of like a no-brainer when it comes to aquariums. You look at the tanks behind you. I talked about how you have the brick and it would look cool, but it really wouldn't. I mean, I was saying you have a cool wall. The tanks would look terrible if you didn't have a background on there. The plants would disappear. You wouldn't even see them anymore. There would be no contrast in there. When you paint it black, it makes it stand out. So I'm assuming that's paint on yours.
It is.
To me, it's kind of a standard thing. It's not even anything I think about. If I'm setting up a new aquarium, I'm painting the background black.
So when you paint, like for me, and I did a video on this where I just used a roller brush, and I actually used the acrylic crafting paint that you pick up from Hobby Lobby, super cheap. It always, for me, takes 3 coats. So you do it, don't lay it on super thick at first. A lot of people want to paint those backgrounds and really try to cover it all in one shot. You are not going to do that no matter what type of paint you use. And B, you're going to make a mess. So just patience. We always talk about patience in the aquarium hobby. Again, there's lots of ways to do this, and maybe John has a different way that also works perfectly fine, but I use a foam roller, and then I use the acrylic paint From Hobby Lobby, I do a coat, let it and I mean thoroughly dry. Put a fan on it. It has to be 100% dry before you go over with the next coat. Otherwise, you're going to rip the paint off from the
Yep.
previous coat. I always do 3 coats, and I basically put a light on so I can see through, make sure I haven't missed anything, and then I'm done. Now, here's the great thing about that. One, it's pretty durable. It will stay on the back of the aquarium. Even if it gets wet, sometimes it'll discolor or crack a little bit, but you can touch that up. But two, like I had to do with both of these 125s, the fronts were scratched a little bit. So I scraped off all the paint on the back. I just sprayed it down with water, waited a minute or two, took a razor blade, and it literally just goes, and it peels
Yep.
right off. Super simple. Flipped it around, cleaned off the back, repainted it with the same method I just talked about. Boom. Now the scraped up front is now the painted back, and I've got this fresh front. So that's one way to do it. I don't know. How do you do yours? Do you spray paint them, or do you do a roll
I've
on?
done it. I've done it every way that it can possibly be done. I've done exactly word for word what you said. And if I'm doing a lot of tanks, that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to get a roller, and I'm going to use the acrylic paint, and boom, it's done. It works. Like you said, several coats. I agree. I've always had at least 3 because you always have those little bubbles that it just, for whatever reason, it didn't stick to that one area. You always have that. I've also recently, I did a tank in my bathroom that I used Plastidip, and it was my first time ever doing it. I heard a lot of people, Steamfot talks about it all the time, using Plastidip, and it was fine. I mean, it worked. I had to tape the trim up, which is not a big deal, and I put tape and covered up the sides, and then, but it's the same process, multiple light coats, and it worked fine. I don't really have a preference one over the other, whether it's the Plastidip or the roll-on paint. And I've also just used Krylon spray paint before in the past. Probably my least favorite of the 3. But to me, it's, if you're going to paint a background, it doesn't need to be something that's complicated, cheap. And the good thing about it, you can even use, I call them chip brushes, the little dollar varnish brushes that, if there's streaks in it, as long as it's covered, if there's stroke marks in it, you're not going to see that.
You're not going to see it. Yeah.
Not through the glass. You'll see it if you're looking at it from the back, but you know, you don't have to be pretty about it. There can be drips and there can be stuff like that. You're not going to see it through the glass.
Right. And that's one of the things too, when you're first painting tanks, it's like, oh my gosh, it's got to be so perfect. And there's a little spot where there's still light coming through. Trust me, when you turn that bad boy around and the light's on the actual tank and it's filled with water, you would be surprised at all of the coverage you get, where if you look at it from the backside, it's like, man, this is not perfect. It doesn't need to be perfect, and it'll still look nearly perfect from the front. The other thing to consider too is, if you're going to add a background to a tank, one of the reasons why I like the darker backgrounds is it doesn't show all the algae and all the dirt and all the nastiness. And so you'll see these real high-end aquascapes, right? We see them all the time at Aquashella, and I know why they do it. They put the light background, almost like that film, and it'll be a real light color. And what it does is, when you look at the aquarium, it looks insanely cool, because the problem with doing black, and Joanna she's always brought this up as a problem, is a very stark stopping point in the tank, right? So from a aquascaping perspective, it is boom, right there in your face. Here is the end of this ecosystem. Where when you're using a lighter background, it almost seems like the tank goes much further back, right? The stark contrast between the back of the tank and the water, it's not there. The problem is, it's not there for only a little bit of time, until this wonderful stuff called algae starts growing on your glass, which is going to do, right? You are going to get algae in an aquarium, especially if it's a planted tank. It's just going to happen. And now, unfortunately, what you're doing is, for me, even in the gallery, I'm primarily concerned about the front of the glass. Right? I don't want there to be algae there. And in the gallery, we do take care of the sides because I want it to look nice. But in the fish room, it's just the front paint. That's all I care about. Right? If there's algae on the sides or the back, I don't care. And if there's algae on the back and the backs are black, you're probably not going to see very much. On a lighter background, you're going to see almost all of it. So now what you're doing is you're trying to maintain at least 2 sides of your aquarium, the back and the front. And the back is much more difficult to get to. So another reason why darker can sometimes be a little bit easier, at least for the maintenance side of it.
Yeah, I'm the exact same way. I just let mine go. In fact, if there gets to be a little bit of algae, I kind of think that that makes it look a little bit more natural, and it doesn't bother me at all on the back. On the
On the back.
sides and on the front glass, then yeah. But you also have to think about the obstacles. You're not really going to have obstacles to clean algae around that's on the front glass, but on
Yeah.
the back, that's where you're putting all your stuff. My two big 240s, I've got rocks stacked up in the back. So I'm not going to be able to get in there and get
Mhm.
all of the algae off. So you're always going to see this line where I wasn't able to get my flipper or my sponge or something back in there. And it's just going to make it look, it's going to make it stand out even more. So I just let the back go and I think it looks nice. And
Yeah.
you don't really even see it anyway. I mean, if it's got hair algae that's flowing in the breeze, then yeah, that looks pretty bad. But if it's just brown algae or something like that, I just leave it alone.
Yep. And not only that, but you're talking about the 240, which is what, 24 inches wide at least. How are you even going to reach back there in the first place? I mean, that's difficult enough without having to transverse all the stuff. Plus, you got lights to deal with, and so you are going to have to, if you've got lids on the tank to get to the back, you're going to have to take those lids off to reach. But now
Right.
what are you doing with your lights? So you're worried about, and you got to see the tank. So it's like, now I got my lights, I'm hanging over a tank with no lids. Hopefully the light doesn't fall in the tank and cause a safety. It just, trust me, go darker with the background. You won't have to worry about all that. It's going to be a lot easier. Everything we've talked about so far, it's relatively clean, right? It's smooth. It's easy to either install or to paint a tank. It's very, very simple. It's not obstructing anything. So your canister filters, your hang on back filters are just going to go nice and easy, right? Do everything they're supposed to do. Intakes and returns are going to fit nice and smooth. The other option here with a background is, of course, to do something 3D. Now we have a 3D background in our Embuna tank over here. To my left, we have at least 3 or 4 3D backgrounds in the fish room. And I mean, these are 3D where they stick out a good 3, 4 inches in certain places where they're kind of like the fake rock backgrounds.
Can I
Ooh,
interrupt you real
yeah,
quick?
for sure.
I'm really sorry to do that, but I wanted, before we go there, because we're gonna, I mean, I got a lot of experience with 3D backgrounds and stuff like that,
Yeah.
but there's one more that has to do with what we talked about before, and I don't even think it's available yet, but I do want to mention it because I thought it was
Okay.
really, really cool. It's a product that I originally had on my 360. It's a product from Current USA. And what this product is a film. You were talking
Yeah.
about like that gray colored film that a lot of the
Yes. Yeah.
aquascapers use. It looks like that, but it's also a little bit transparent. And what
Yep.
they had was, my cat is going to ruin this. They had a light bar that went on
Mhm.
the top of the back of your tank,
Yep.
and you could change the colors, and it
Yeah.
was mesmerizing.
Yep.
It was so cool, very expensive, but it hooked up to your lighting, and it was really, really neat. I really enjoyed that. You can make it pink, you can make it blue, you can make it change colors and be
Huh?
gradient and stuff like that. It was very, very cool. I loved that thing. I did stop using it because I wanted to go back to black, but it was a really cool thing, and I thought I would mention that. I don't even know if
Yeah.
Current has that product available anymore, but it
Well,
was a
so yeah,
really, really neat
if you
thing.
want to see what John is talking about, if you were to go back to the videos I did of Aquashella tours of probably in that 2019, 2018, 2019, they used to have a booth at Aquashella, and you could see in there because I always shot that tank. So, and there's a ton of DIYs you can do with an LED strip along the bottom and just do a uh, almost like a window tint sort of thing, like a real light, and then it would show on there. It would illuminate like John's talking about. So yeah, it was pretty cool. But I have not heard of that product or seen it. I almost wonder if it was something that was like, hey, this is going to be really cool, and then not enough people adopted it to make it,
Right.
because I see it. I thought it was pretty interesting as well, and I haven't seen it probably since Aquashella 2019, right? So like pre COVID era, because when we came back to Florida in 2020
21.
or 21, they weren't there, and I haven't seen them since. So, and I haven't seen anybody
Yeah.
running it on YouTube. I haven't seen any advertisements on it. But yeah, it was pretty cool.
Yeah, that was a neat thing. I had never seen any other companies do that, and I just thought that it was worth mentioning. But
Yeah.
back to your 3D background. I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to
Oh,
make sure I didn't
I
forget that.
thought I completely forgot about that one. So 3D backgrounds, yeah. Uh, the big advantage there, of course, is you're getting what almost like a slice of nature, right? That's kind of what I feel like when you're running those rock 3D backgrounds. Is it looks like something you might see in like a public aquarium or something like that, where you have these nice rocks. And the nice thing is if you were going to do this for real, right, put big rocks in the back of your aquarium, they're going to weigh an insane amount. And for some of these aquariums, it's like I don't know if I feel comfortable putting 200 pounds or 300 pounds of rock to get that really cool background. I'm not so sure this tank is going to be able to support all that weight plus the water plus the substrate. So these 3D backgrounds are basically like a foam, a hardened foam, and they're coated. I mean, they look pretty realistic. If you were to do look at the fish room tours I've done of those tanks, it's like wow, those look pretty decent. You can get them customized. I went to one company where I had them customized, like, hey, where's your intake going to be? Where's your return going to be? Are you running a heater back there? The nice thing is they can hide all of that. It's all behind this 3D background. So you don't have to see any of your equipment. I've got my intake and my heater hidden behind these things, especially the one over here on my left. You don't see anything. And it's really awesome. There's a downside. Have you run 3D backgrounds?
I have. I love
Yeah.
them, but I'm. There is a downside for sure.
Yeah. Why don't you go ahead and share with everybody what the potential downside is to these awesome 3D backgrounds?
Well, I always used Universal Rocks.
I
I
used them, and I've
still
used what was the other one? Aqua Decor was the last one I got too.
right. I still have an Universal Rocks product in my 360 right now. It's a big tree stump, and I love it. It's awesome. I love their product. And so this is not necessarily a reflection of their product. It's more the way it's installed and the way it's maintained can be a problem. I always had the Universal Rocks 3D backgrounds in my 240s. In fact, I had one in this tank for quite a while, and it's beautiful. It's gorgeous. But I made a mistake with them, and this is something that you need to think about. I never permanently attached them to
Oh,
the tank. All I did was put it in there and then fill it up, and it's done. And so there was
wow.
always gaps.
Yeah.
And if there's gaps in an African cichlid tank, two things are going to go back there: fish and poop.
Yeah.
And so I I'm going to admit to something here that I'm not very proud of. The tree stump that I have in my Oscar tank, I have that. It's just sitting in there. It's not attached to anything or anything like that. I have it covering up a Seche Ultra Zero, which I have permanently in that tank. For some reason, that area behind that has been the accumulation point of poop like you would not believe. And I've got 9 heavy poopers in that tank. And I went one time doing a water change. I moved that tank, and I'm not kidding you, Jason. There was 4 inches of fish poop back there, and I was wondering why my Ultra Zero wouldn't pump any water out. It's because it
Yeah.
was clogged up from all
Yeah.
this fish poop. And so that is one of the downsides for sure to any 3D background. I don't care what brand it is, stuff getting back there and not being able to access it to getting it out. If you install it properly, it's not a problem. But if you just take the lazy route like I've done and just set them in there, you're asking for problems. And I mean, I had fish get stuck back there too. And that's never fun to have to get them out from behind there.
Yep. Yeah. So I've gotten them from Universal Rocks. I've also the one I got here was Aqua Decor. Very similar. Aqua Decor is probably a little bit more not quite as expensive. The ones that I got in the 75, they actually went together in like 4 different sections. Really super easy to put together to give you a picture. But I did silicone everything in, so I didn't have any. I've never had any issues because at least with the Aqua Decor, it's a solid back. So there's nothing can get
Right.
back there. So if you
Right.
if you do what they say and like okay, you just put your silicone all over the back, and they tell you exactly like they actually give you the they mark it on the back with like a marker and say, okay, do this pattern. It's that simple for your silicone. Put this piece in first, this piece in second. So then you put them all in. And I would just put some heavy rocks on top just to kind of weigh it down, wait 48 hours. And that thing's going nowhere. If I'm going to rip that out, it's going to be a mess. Universal Rocks ones, from what I can remember, I thought one of them might have had a hollow back, and there really should be a top cap and that should be a solid back. And by the way, you can get these from these companies where it's not so 3D, where it's a little bit flatter, but it still has texture, which is pretty cool. I've done a couple of 20 gallons like that because in some of those narrower tanks. So one of the downsides to this is you're going to be taking up width from your aquarium. I mean, these things will stick out. I can't imagine in the 240 how big those artificial sections were, but even in the 75 gallon places, I have lost a solid 4 or 5 inches as it
Yep.
crops, comes out from the back of the tank. So you are going to lose space. If you've got a narrow aquarium like a 55 or something like that, or a 29, that you'd probably be better off going with the textured 3D background, which is a lot flatter than one of the big fake rock ones like I've got in some of my tanks, and probably the ones that you've had. So you just keep in mind, you're going to lose volume for sure.
Yep.
The other thing that I thought you were going to say is the cost.
Oh yeah,
These,
that's a thing too.
yeah, these things, they can cost as much as, well, they can cost more than the aquarium itself, right? So if
Hmm.
you were to go to like a Petco, PetSmart, like, oh, I found a 75 gallon for their 50% off sale, bring it home, set like, all right, I want to do something cool, 3D background. Like, you'll get some sticker shock depending on the type that you choose. They can easily go for some. I don't remember what I paid for the one. I did pay for all of them, so they weren't ever sponsored or they didn't send them to me, but they were a lot. I mean, for the 75 gallon, I want to say maybe $300, and for the 40 breeders I've got from Universal Rocks, I think they were pretty close to 300 as well.
Yep.
So you're going to pay. You are definitely going to pay for these things, and so keep that in mind. But to me, like, would I do all of my 40 something aquariums I've got down here? No way. In fact, I wanted to do the 125s. When I talked to Joanna about scaping, she was like, I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to do the rock backgrounds. And she was like, well, what's that going to cost? I looked at it. It was going to be a lot of money. There's one other thing from a scaping perspective, that she actually doesn't like the rock backgrounds because she finds them too limiting. She's like, once you've got that rock background in there, you're stuck with it. And all of your aquascapes from that point forward have to match that background. So if you
Right.
really love that background, great. But once you go tan, you're not changing that color, which means now you're probably not going to want to put in a non-earth tone substrate, and it's mostly going to be driftwood. And then what are you going to do? You're not going to put in Seiryu stone with a tan background, most likely. So you are stuck with that
Right.
color scheme.
Yeah, but you know what? The flip side of that is some people do appreciate simplicity and don't want to mess with their tanks all the time like we do. And so the idea of putting this thing on the back that, yes, is expensive, but you put it in there and you're done. Like,
Yeah.
so many times I've seen so many gorgeous tanks where they don't have anything on the substrate at all as far as like rocks or anything like that. It's just a 3D background and it's gorgeous.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
if you do like that, I'm a minimalist in my aquariums, even though I got stacks of rocks. It's just a stack of rocks. It's not anything fancy. I like minimal. I like the fish to be the decor, unless it's a heavily planted tank. But anyway,
Right.
forget about all that. But so the idea of just putting something in there and then just walking away and it's done, that's very appealing to me, as long as it's done right.
Right.
Like you said, that's a no-brainer. Siliconing the aqua decor stuff, and their stuff is, I like the fact that it's solid and it has that back black flat background. I don't know why this is so difficult for me to say. To where nothing's going to get stuck behind it and stuff like that. I like that a lot. You can accomplish the same thing with the Universal Rocks products, but you're going to have those gaps in the back, and it
Yeah.
just is what it is.
Yeah, which again, that's not as ideal. And the nice thing too about those 3D backgrounds is you can get different colors. So they come in various shades of tan and gray, and a darker gray and lighter gray and dark tan and light tan. They've got all the different names from different textures, different rock types for different biotopes. You mentioned that you have the tree stump there, and so they will absolutely make large, like, standalone fake rocks for your aquarium. Again, the idea here is you're keeping the weight down. I actually got, as part of the package, there was some standalone rocks, like fake rocks that went with that background. I didn't wind up using them because I'm like, after I looked at them, I'm like, I've got to silicone these to the actual bottom of the tank before I put the substrate in. That's going to be really tough because I don't know what I'm going to do with the rest of the rocks and the wood that I have, the real stuff. So I didn't wind up using that. I found that to be a little bit more of a pain. But the background itself is good. If you've got like the tree stump coming out of like a tan 3D rock background, that can look really cool, like a riverbank. Really awesome look as well. You can save a ton of money if you wanted to DIY it. They almost never look as good as what you're getting professionally. I've done one. If you look at, I don't know, probably really early fish room tours, like me touring the upstairs, or maybe 2019, I had it in here. What I did is I took styrofoam. I went to Lowe's, and they sell these styrofoam like flat sheets that I think they were maybe like a foot wide and just a couple feet long. And I bought a bunch of them so I could buy enough so that, they were probably quarter inch, half inch. Actually, I think I bought different thicknesses. And so I bought all these things. And then I just, with a marker, I kind of just drew a wavy line and then cut it out. Right? Just use a knife to cut out, really super messy. You're getting styrofoam all over the place. And then I did each layer, I just cut it out in a different pattern. And then I siliconed them all together, put them in they were going to be the size of a standard 20 gallon. So that was nice because then I could make it a little bit thinner. It wasn't going to be as thick as the 3D rock backgrounds you buy from Universal Rocks or Aqua Decor. Silicone them all together, and then you can paint them with cement. And so you put some cement color in there, you paint them just with a brush, slap that stuff on. You don't have to be careful. Just try not to get it all over the back because that's eventually going to get siliconed in. Let it dry. Usually takes a couple coats. There's a couple downsides to doing this. One, again, it's not going to look quite as nice as the professional stuff. Two, when you put that thing in an aquarium, it absolutely, positively is going to throw your pH way, 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 way off the scale. There is no pH testing equipment for aquariums that's even going to measure how high your pH is. And so what I found myself having to do is I put that 20 gallon on a counter next to the sink in the kitchen. I'd fill it up, wait a few hours, pH would be through the roof, drain it. And I just kept doing that maybe 2 or 3 times a day. Fill the tank, drain it. It was right by the sink. And after about a week, the pH was finally stable at, like, for us, around a pH of like 8 to 8.2. And then it was fine. But it took a lot of water changes to do that. So if you had a really large aquarium and you were doing that, you might be better off just submerging that inside of a bathtub and just filling up the tub, letting that stuff leach out, drain the tub and refill it, and see if you get yelled at by your significant other and hope that you don't. Be like, honey, you can't use the tub for a week. Wait, what? So that's definitely a downside. And it lasted, I pulled it out of an aquarium because I, like a smart guy that I am sometimes, I used it as a quarantine tank, and the fish finally figured out, hey, guess what? If we just swim into in the ridges of the background, they can't catch us. So one morning we're getting ready for a swap, and Eli's like, Dad, I can't catch these fish. I'm like, yes, you can. You just gotta, come on, man. We don't have all day. We got to get going. He's like, Dad, you try it. I'm like, fine. I'm over there. Oh, let me show you how to do it. I'm like, well, they're all going in the background. He's like, that's what I'm trying to say. I'm like, so I had to rip that thing out, just like, rip the whole thing out. And like, all right, now we can catch the fish. But that's another downside. If you're trying to catch fish out of a tank with a 3D background and they're smart like cichlids are, good luck. You're not getting them out of there.
Yep. I have a story.
Uh-oh.
A similar, well, not similar, but it's similar in that it has to do with a DIY background. I did one also, and I was so proud of this thing. And I don't recall, but I'm pretty sure I got the idea of how to do it from Joey. And this was before I knew Joey.
Yeah.
I think he did a video about making the concrete on foam 3D backgrounds.
Okay.
So I watched the video. I think it was his. It might have been somebody else. I watched the video on how to shape the foam. Like you said, siliconing a bunch of it together, shape the foam, and then coat it in concrete. And once I saw them coating it with concrete and then starting to paint it, I was like, I got this. No big deal. Turn the video off, go to work, start doing my thing. Stacked up all of the silicone or the styrofoam, siliconed it all together, used my angle grinder to shape it, and I made it look like a piece of Texas Holy Rock, and it was huge. And this was for 150 gallon. And I even, because I'm a dork, I even carved into it J Hearts L, because I'm just a nerd. Oh. It was adorable, and it was this whole thing, and it looked really good. I painted it white, and it was really, really nice, and I was really proud of it. and I was setting up a 150-gallon tank for this. And so I took this background after it had cured for probably a couple weeks. I siliconed it all into the tank. It was great. You need to get down. My cat is going to disconnect my internet. So got it all ready, and then it was all set, and then I filled it up. I should have watched the end of that video because I ended up putting like an inch thick concrete layer over this thing. And what the person, again, I don't know if it was the king of DIY or if it was somebody else, what they did at the end of the video was very smart. When they were done, when the concrete was set and it was all cured, they took a blowtorch and blew and burnt out all of the styrofoam. Why? Why would they do that? Because styrofoam is what they use in rafts because it floats so well. So I siliconed this thing in as good as I could, filled it up with water, and about 45 seconds after it was full, that thing shot straight up out of the top of the tank. And here's the thing. If you watch some of my older videos with that 150-gallon tank in it, you'll see a wood clamp right in the center of the tank because that thing shot out and broke the center support piece of the tank. So I used a $50 Bessie woodworking clamp to clamp, and I had it on there for the rest of the time I owned that tank. I had that Bessie clamp on there because it busted that center support right out of there. And you don't want to fill up a 6-foot tank that's 30 inches tall
it's
without
gone.
that center support. Yeah. So that was a complete and total nightmare. I ended up busting it up into a million pieces and threw it away, but I was so mad about that. So yeah, lesson learned. If you're watching a DIY project, watch the whole video. And especially at the end when they tell you how to make sure it doesn't explode out of the tank.
Yep. That's a good point. You know, one of the other minor inconveniences with these 3D backgrounds, whether it's DIY or the ones you buy, is if they do get covered in algae, it becomes a lot more problematic to get rid of it because you really can't take like a wire brush and scrape it off. You're going to scrape off the special coating that they use. So like for our situation here in the 75-gallon Mbuna tank, that rock background's got a little bit of green algae. I actually think it looks cool. It makes it look more natural. So it's not a huge concern, but if it was like really coated with stuff, the plecos in there we have, it was coated with brown diatom algae. They cleared it off in 24 hours. But if you had something else in there, like that red algae that grows, like we get it sometimes on our rocks and stuff, if that ever grows on that background, it's staying because I don't have a way to get it off there. So the whole thing will be coated red at some point. And maybe that'll happen. I don't know. But so just keep that in mind. You got stuff on there. You got to be really careful about getting algae off.
Yeah. I'm like you. I mean, I've got these 2 tanks behind me that are stacked up rocks. They're maybe the next style that we're going to talk about as far as backgrounds go. It is the risky strategy of doing it. I actually consulted the manufacturer of the aquariums, and they told me it would be fine as long as I put down the proper base to support them. And I haven't had any issues yet, but I'm not going to lie to you. I do worry a little bit that somehow something might shift and one of them comes barreling down, and that's basically the end if that happens. But like you, my inspiration for doing these tanks was your neck of the woods. It was at the Shed Aquarium, which I love that place. We were there when my son graduated from Navy boot camp. I think it was 2 years ago. And they had an Mbuna tank that was all stacked up rocks, probably fake, but it was all gnarly. Like there was algae everywhere. And some people might look at that and say, well, that looks crappy, but not me. I looked at it. I was like, that's beautiful. Like nothing looks more natural than that. I was hoping that was going to happen with my rocks, but it's not happening. They're staying clean. I've not touched them because if you take a sponge to them and all it does is rub the sponge and deteriorate your sponge off. So you can't clean it off. So if it gets that way, you just kind of have to deal with it. But that's what I want to happen. So,
right. Yeah. And I think that is one of the last options is if you want to just run with real rocks in the back of your aquarium, it's probably actually, I think, safer to do with some of the larger aquariums that are using a very thick panel of glass on the bottom, especially if you've got like a custom aquariums tank. That's some pretty thick glass, or like the old school all glass or something like that. Some of the newer tanks, they're a little thin. I probably would be more, actually, believe it or not, more concerned if I had, let's say, a 29 gallon. I wanted to stack the rocks all the way from top to bottom, because that's a pretty thin piece of glass
Yep.
relative to other tanks, and you still have to stack it pretty high, right? So if you're looking at the weight given the surface area on the bottom of that aquarium, it's actually quite a bit because it's a tall tank. So um, the advantage, of course, is you can just stack rocks until you get something that you like. You're not spending a lot of money on a background, although rocks aren't cheap anymore. I mean, if you go to a pet store and you're paying $3-4 a pound and you really want to stack rocks to cover the back of your aquarium, you very well might be better off just getting the custom aquarium, or I'm sorry, the universal rocks or the Aqua Decor 3D background and not have the weight. Super
Right.
easy to install. You're going to save a ton of time. You can install one of those 3D backgrounds in, I don't know, 30 minutes. If you're stacking rocks in a 75, it's going to take you longer than 30 minutes to get it the way you want, most likely.
Yep.
And the other thing is, if you do have to make a change, you have to break that tank down. Trust me when I tell you, after breaking down all these tanks on this side, and now we've got over here totes and totes and totes filled with river rock and dragonstone and Seiryu stone, it is a pain in the you know what to take all those rocks out. They're slippery when they're coming out, and you've got detritus building up. That's the other thing that you don't have with the 3D backgrounds is they don't offer a lot of space for fish waste and uneaten food and detritus to kind of get in between the crevices. There's just not that many natural crevices there. You're stacking real rocks, trust me, there's all kinds of stuff that's getting caught up in there, and that's going to lead to higher nitrates. That's going to lead to more algae growth, harder to control your water parameters because you got just rotting stuff in there that you can't get to. So, and then the thing you mentioned is stability. Right? You got cichlids back there in the tank that's in the back by you. Those guys like to dig.
Yep.
And so I'm sure you spent a ton of time making sure the foundation was correct.
I did. And, I did a video all about both of them. And for the record, it cost me about $450 to buy the rock to do both of these tanks. My intention was to only do my yellow lab tank. That was the priority. But then when I got that done, there was a whole bunch left. So I did this one. And so, yeah, it was pretty expensive. But I painstakingly made sure that the foundation was good. The largest rocks are on the bottom. And I also, and this was not a pleasure to do because they are 30-inch tall tanks. So I'm up on a ladder reaching all the way down into the bottom. It's not a fun thing to do, but I would actually like put the rock down and then just try to move it, try to shake it, try to see if there was any movement in it at all. And until I felt comfortable that there was no moving of that rock, I wouldn't move on to the next one. So yeah, it was a long process. It took me all day. And when I say all day, I mean like 12 hours to do the yellow lab tank. But I'm super proud of the results. I mean, it looks really, really good. I have told myself though, I have a very specific strategy if I'm ever going to remove those, and it's going to be very, very risky. I'm going to drain the entire tank and pull all of the fish out. Hopefully there aren't any hidden behind the back, and I'm going to let the rocks dry out before I pull them out.
Yeah.
Because of what you said, I've got 30-pound rocks in there
Yeah.
that if I'm picking it up and it's slippery and it slips out of my hand, you're done for. So that's how I would have to do it. And it's not going to be fun, but it's the risk I take because of the choice I made. And I love the look, and a lot of people love the look. It was a very good performing video for us. Yeah. So, it is what it is.
Yeah, one of the things you can do too while we're talking about rocks, especially if you're going to do a background, if you want to save a little bit of money, is check out your landscaping places around you. A lot of the rocks that we got for the tanks that used to be on this side, not the gallery tanks, but the fish room tanks, were just stuff that we got from landscaping places. We got a lot of comments. We had a 33 long lake tank, and you can take it. People would ask all the time, what rock is that? It was just flagstone. And it's not a super heavy rock. It's a flat sort of, it's the type of rock that you use for like pavers and stuff like that, like little walkways. But for a lake tank, and you can set up, it worked out perfectly, super easy to stack. You get them in all different sizes, really, really cheap. I think at the time we paid like 15 cents a pound. And most of the river rock that we bought was maybe 30 cents a pound. Compare that to I went to a fish store and I paid $3 or $4 a pound.
Right.
The landscaping places, if you're looking for a lot of rock to do a background, that could be a really nice option. Just make sure, like with the flagstone, it didn't change our water parameters because our water was already hard. We already had a high pH, but if you've got really soft water or really low pH, some of those rocks will change your water parameters.
Yeah, and for the record, that's what I did for these tanks. Was I went to a landscape place and bought an entire pallet, which was 2,000 pounds of rocks, and it was $450. And you know, that would be somebody that's selling that for somebody that's going to be like lining a ditch with it or something like that. You know, not for putting it in an aquarium.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So I don't have any other. Can you think of any other options for a background? I mean, we talked about no background. We talked about using various types of paper and the 3D backgrounds.
You know what? I think that we're pretty well covered on all of it. I don't know of any other options. The beautiful thing about it, I apologize to our listeners and viewers. I'm watching my cat stick his head into a bag of North Fin tropical sticks, and I'm just waiting for it to fall down. And what a nightmare! But anyway, I keep telling Lisa, close those bags up. Carl. Let me shows you how good North Fin is. We did name him Carl because of Walking Dead too. By the way, we were watching an episode of Walking Dead when he adopted us. But anyway, so back to here now. I took care of the cat problem. Yeah, this is what you get when you have a cat in your fish room. But anyway, yeah, I don't think there's anything left really to cover on it. It is kind of a basic thing. I got to be honest with you. I'm surprised we got 50 minutes out of it. That's impressive.
You know, but now you've got, for people listening, you've got all the options there. And one of the cool things is the podcast coming up. There's going to be some where we've got some guests coming up, right? They were guests from Aquashella, and so hopefully you'll get to hear from some other people besides us. That has always been our plan, right? John and I, when we sat down and we were talking about this, we always wanted to bring in people who are in the know in the industry in various different forms and formats. So hopefully you'll be looking forward to that, hearing from some other people who have got some unique perspectives.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's our plan, but it hasn't happened yet. It's booked, but we are filming this before Aquashella, so I hope it happened.
Yep, we hope it happened. And if it happened, you'll be seeing the results of what happened in the future, but now in the past, at some point in your future. So thank you so much for being here. On that confusing note, we really appreciate all the support you've shown and leaving the comments and the likes and sharing the videos. That's really important for us. If you see something you like, hey, share it on a Facebook post, get it out there so more people can listen to us talk about aquarium backgrounds for 50 minutes. Thank you so much. We will be back same time, same place next week.
See ya.